NaCh In the beginning of the holy book Likutay Moharan, the magnum opus of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, there are 3 approbations printed, and after the approbations, Rabbi Natan writes that really they had attained many more approbations from the leading rabbis and greats of the generation, but due to Rabbi Nachman's tremendous humility, he opted not to print them. And in the second printing of the book, or later printing, Rabbi Natan said, he writes that he found the actual original copies of just these 3 approbations and none of the rest. The rest were lost. So it was divine providence that these 3 were originally selected, and they were retained. Rabbi Natan was able to find the originals. Now, the scoffers come and they have a heyday with this because Rabbi Nachman said some of the most fantastic, unbelievable things about himself. How he's the greatest novelty in the whole, and he's fixing the entire world for the coming of the redemption. Many amazing things. And all of a sudden, the scoffers say, when it comes to printing the approbations, he's claiming modesty. So, even though they're scoffing, which is a terrible thing for a person to do, it does need understanding. It is a valid point to understand why, in this case of printing the approbations, Rabbi Nachman would choose this humility not to print them in contradistinction to the other amazing things that he said about himself. So there's a very important principle that I learned from Rabbi Shlomo Kalbach of blessed memory. Rabbi Shlomo was a great NaCh. He was singing NaCh MayUman. He sings the Petek, and he lays down an amazing, very fundamental principle that we have to live by. And the principle is as follows: there are certain things a person has to be humble about, and there's certain things that a person has to really be proud about. When the things that a person was born with, talents and things that were given to him, presented to him by God, those things a person has to be extremely proud of and hold up high. Whereas personal attainments, where the person attained by himself through his hard work and devotion, those are things that a person has to be very careful to be humble about and modest about and not flaunt them at all. Right? So the things that a person has going for him from birth, or presented to him at some other stage, that suddenly he discovers that God graced him with some sort of talent or ability, then yes, those things were given to him, and he has to be extremely proud of them and flaunt them and use them to the max. And when it comes to things that he worked on himself and he achieved himself, those are things that he has to be very careful to keep behind the scenes, keep out of sight in modesty and humility. So with this amazing rule, we can understand that when Rabbi Nachman got approbations for his work, Likutay Moharan, in general, when a person gives an approbation, he's singing the praises of the author, not so much saying, "Wow, look, this is look what God brought into the world for us." They're praising the author himself. Look at what this person achieved, because they want to praise the person himself. They're praising this person's work. So when it comes to printing such things, so then when Rabbi Nachman says this, with this we have to be very humble. It's not something that he was going to flaunt the emphasis, the direction of approbations is to point to one's own efforts and accomplishment, and that's something that humility has to override, has to come first. Whereas when Rabbi Nachman spoke all the amazing things about himself, even when he's speaking about his accomplishments, he was really just saying, look what God did. He wasn't trying to, he wasn't saying this is my efforts. He was saying, look at what God did over here. Look what he did through me. I was the vessel for this, but this is a big distinction. That answers it. But in truth, there's also something much deeper here, that Rabbi Nachman said that real humility only comes from when a person can speak of himself. Didn't explain this rule, but the simple understanding is that when one has real humility and abnegation, when really abnegates himself to God, so he's just a vessel for God, and the Shekhinah, the divine presence, speaks through him, through his lips or through his body movements, right? So when a person has real anava, real humility and abnegation to God, so then he could really be a vessel and a voice for God, and then he will be speaking about himself, because God is will be using him as a vessel and a mouthpiece, and if he's the mouthpiece, it's probably all going to be about him, because it's all going through him. And this is so Rabbi Nachman knew certain things about him, about his greatness. He was the mouthpiece of God, and God spoke through him all the greatness of who Rabbi Nachman was. And obviously all these approbations that he was getting from all these rabbis did not touch the toenails of who Rabbi Nachman really was. And one of the praises that we give Rabbi Nachman and great tzaddikim is lo dumia tila. For him, silence is a praise. The Ramchal writes this about himself in one of the letters, and he explains to the person he's writing to that you don't even have the conception, you don't have the means of even beginning to understand the levels that I've reached. I can't even explain to you. You don't even have the wherewithal to even begin to understand. So when Rabbi Nachman had all these approbations from the rabbis, why he picked these three, then he's further study. But in general, no one in that generation or any generation would be able to give approbation properly, delineating and praising what Rabbi Nachman did. They can't touch it. It's beyond them. So due to Rabbi Nachman's great humility, his abnegation to God, he couldn't sell God short on such approbations, because he everything that was said there just fell short of what was going on. So how could he put it out there, and it would serve as a block on God? It would be a stigma. It would be a stain. He abnegated himself, abnegated all these trivial, even though I'm sure they were great praises, but for him they were trivial, and they would be, and that wasn't according to his humility, because true humility doesn't let anything stand in and block the message of God. Now, the first principle that we laid down from Shlomo Carlebach, we understand how to use ourselves. We have to take advantage of this to really go all out with our God-given talents and abilities, and be modest with what's our own achievements. And the second rule too that I'm laying down here from Rabbi Nachman is also something that we have to inculcate and use ourselves, because Rabbi Nachman says that even a lesser tzaddik has some type of point that even a greater tzaddik can't understand. Every person has their own nikuda, their own point, which is unique to them, and that's why they're in the world, because that's their point. And Rabbi Nachman says in a few places in the Likutay Moharan that every Jew has a point of Messiah. He has some point, which in that point he's one with Messiah. In this point, it circumvents, it supersedes, it overrides everything till Messiah. It's a point that no tzaddik above him could understand. It's special to him, and he's untouchable in that point. Every person has that point, wherever he was born, whatever family, every Jew, whatever he was born into. If he was born into the world, he could be the biggest loser and the degradation, but he was born with a point that's unique to him, and in that point he's untouchable, and no rabbi, the greatest, can touch it. And even if they will praise this little fellow, this down lowly Jew, and say, "Oh, we see in you such a beautiful spark," really, they're degrading him because they have no idea, no conception of how really true this spark in this Jew is. He could carry the approbation around if it gives him some strength, but if he's merits to really be a NaNach, to follow in the ways of Rabbi Nachman, he won't even want to print it. It'll be something. Maybe Rabbi Nachman did send people to collect him. He had reasons to at least make sure that the approbations were there, and I could think of a few reasons offhand, but without getting into that. But to actually have it in his book, he didn't need it. Not only did he need it, he didn't want it. Every one of us, however, wherever we're holding in the world, we have some point that's untouchable, and no star, no celebrity has an idea, an inkling, and they can say whatever they want, but it would be desecrating it. And this is the power of saying NaCh NaChMa NaChMaN. Like Saba Yisrael said, Saba Yisrael, who got the letter from Rabbi Nachman, he said, Rabbi Nachman said, "Ani NaCh NaChMa NaChMaN. I am NaCh NaChMa NaChMaN." So he was clearly saying this in the name of Rabbi Nachman, but then he keeps saying Ani NaCh NaChMa NaChMaN so many times, and he doesn't always bring, doesn't always first say Rabbi Nachman said. He says it at the beginning, but he keeps repeating, "I am NaCh NaChMa NaChMaN," because this is the secret of every person's individuality, to build a person's own point of individuality. That's accomplished by this song, NaCh NaChMa NaChMaN. And this needs much, much further elaboration with the help of God. But for now, NaCh NaChMa NaChMaN MayUman. NaCh